So I have the pleasure of introducing Bob Matthews, who will be your speaker tonight. And Bob Matthews is the Josiah Meigs Distinguished Teaching Professor Emeritus of Entomology at the University of Georgia. He received his master's degree in entomology from Michigan State University and his Ph.D. in biology from Harvard University. His research interests include insect behavior, evolution of social insects, behavioral ecology of wasps, teacher education, and science curriculum materials development. Before being awarded a Huyck research grant in 2020, which was delayed because of the pandemic, Bob was last here as a summer fellow doing his doctoral work 55 years ago. That is very cool. We're so glad to have Bob back here tonight.
This is to prove I was here 55 years ago. You can look at the labels, it's got my name on them and the date. That's and these are in the collection upstairs on this number. These are some of the wasps that I've been working on, and it's great to be back. Lincoln Pond and the cottage are virtually the same as they looked 55 years ago. I mean, there's no more apple tree there, but little things, no more docking to the lake. They won't let me fish anymore. I had the fish back then. Oh, you know, it was catch and release kind of thing. There's some pickerel in that pond, I'll tell you. Anyway, thank you so much for coming, and let's see if we can get this to work. It's a ticklish situation, but that's a giant walking stick, of course, and so this is the kind of thing that many of us have experienced at one point or another. Probably yellow jackets. Maybe they put their picnic down next to a nest, and if so, that's definitely going to happen. Well, I got interested in things extending way back, and here's a picture to prove it. This was taken by the Grand Master of Apiculture, honeybees, the Professor Roger Morse at Cornell University. I spent a summer there. I forget which year it was, but it was around 1972 or so. And one day, another, I think he was an extension agent in one of the counties of New York, came to Roger and said, I need to take a bee beard picture for my Christmas card. And he had his Santa Claus hat, and I lived in July. And so I watched that, and I was standing there, and I've been working at Roger's lab with a couple of his students. And he said, hey, Bob, wouldn't you like to try that? And I thought, wow. I mean, I'm a beekeeper as well, but I've never experienced any of that. And again, a very ticklish situation. The trick is you put a couple of pieces of cotton in your nostrils and ears, and Roger stood there and sort of herded the bees around until he got them just nicely framed to make the beard all over the shoulders. And it was quite an experience. And then, well, to start with all, you have the queen in the cage, and the swarm is around the queen on another nearby post. He grabs the string with the queen cage and slings it around my neck. And almost instantly, there's these thousands of bees swirling around me, all landing to be close to the queen. And so you do the reverse to get out of it. You have to find the string, remove the queen cage, and hang it back on the post, and all the bees left. It was that simple. Pretty amazing. Oh, goodness. So let's see, what do I do here? There it is. Well, there are lots of things that sting, and so it's a pretty broad title, but now you know that I'm going to focus pretty much on wasps and related creatures. But these are some of the other kinds of things, even plants. The stinging nettle there on the right is a potential irritant. Now, I had to throw this slide in. How do we have that set up? Well, anyway. I don't know how it goes. The world's longest stinger actually belongs to a wasp, which back in 1967 and subsequently was quite common on the preserve. I have not found it this trip, and I've got John looking for it. But it's uses its stinger not to defend itself in any way, but to drill literally into solid wood. And that's a wonderful picture that I took off the web. You can see the ovipositor, or the stinger, is this long part right here, and it's already about half of the way drilled into that solid wood tree trunk. And then the little extra parts are the valve covers that protect it normally when it's not using it. But if you ever see these, has any of you seen these by chance? It's you know, okay. They would be on dying beech trees, and now is the time of year when they would be out there. This is one of 3 species common on the preserve, and they differ in the coloration and length of the stinger or ovipositor. And the other neat thing about these, and I had a graduate student that came to the preserve to do his master's thesis on this, is the male behavior. These are males, they lack the ovipositor, but they're on the edge of the beech tree, and they have detected that a female is about to emerge. Of course, she'd be a virgin female, and they're jostling among themselves, competing, attempting to stick their abdomens in and mate with her before she even emerges. And sometimes they're successful, but it's quite a dramatic thing. And the males, you know, like male competition everywhere is pretty exciting stuff. So the things that will sting us are, of course, in the insect group called the Hymenoptera, and specifically Aculeata, which refers to the sting. And they are shown here. I think we have velvet ants in New York, but I can't recall. I grew up in Michigan. I don't remember them in Michigan, but we have them very commonly in Georgia. They're brilliantly colored. Yeah, they're really spectacular animals, and I'll have a little more to say about them later. Do they occur? Do you know, Sue?
I've seen them before, I just don't remember where.
Okay.
Are they in the South?
Well, they're in the South for
Okay,
sure.
then that's where I've seen them.
I don't think I ever saw one here, but anyway, they're included. Now, of course, most wasps are not in the aculeate group that stings. Most of those that you saw in the previous picture live in social groups like the ants, where they have a queen and the colony serves the queen and works to protect her. But the vast majority, by far the vast majority of the wasps are parasitoids that attack caterpillars, for example, as you can see with the hornworm on the right, and other caterpillars or flies or beetles, you name it. Almost every other group of insects has parasitoid wasps that attack it at one stage in the life cycle. They, of course, sting the caterpillar, and that's where they use their stinger. They don't defend it in any way. And I just have to make a point about these guys over here. A lot of people mistakenly call those eggs. They are not eggs. They are wasps about to become adults. These are the cocoons of the parasitoid, which has now essentially eviscerated that caterpillar. So larvae were feeding inside her. When they get full grown, they emerge and spin their cocoons on the surface. And if you see one of these, it's great to leave it because all of those are part of a natural biological control of things that are on here. Now, I had to throw this one in because everybody in the South knows these. An invasive species that is well established, fire ants. And if you've never experienced fire ants, you probably don't want to, you don't have to. They are vicious, but this is pretty much a scene in my front yard all the time. There's always a fire ant mound or two along the curb. And despite my efforts to keep them under control, if you disturb that, it becomes just a surging mass of ants. And should you be unfortunate enough to step in it, they are on you. And it's a very unpleasant experience. Their stings form pustules, and it's not a pleasant thing. They really itch. So if you do go into the south ever and you see a fire ant mounds, or just avoid them, don't set up your tent on them. One thing about fire ants is that they are creatures of disturbed habitats, so you don't find them in the forests. You find them anywhere along the roadways, lawns, and that kind of thing. Okay, switching to a different insect briefly. Anybody know what we've got here? Yeah, that's it. Little hole, spattered sawdusty material or granular sawdust here with the hole that's up in this 2x4. These are the work of carpenter bees, which I know we have here. They're called carpenter bees because they actually have to chew that hole. There's one at work. Here's what's behind the hole. Basically, the female chews in about 1 inch typically, and then turns and chews with the direction of the grain, often bifurcated like you see in that one. And then she brings in pollen, since she's a bee, and lays eggs, partitions them off into little compartments or cells, and each cell produces next generation of carpenter bees for next year. And here you see some late larval grubs. Oh, another colony. But a lot of people are scared of carpenter bees. They're big and they're very conspicuous. I've been here in May, probably they would have been all around these buildings. Leanne is shaking her head, and one of our interns. And a lot of people find them quite threatening. But what's going on is the males are primarily the ones you see. You may not think they're males, but male aculeate Hymenoptera are all totally harmless. It's only the females that have the sting, because as you saw, the sting is the modified ovipositor for laying eggs. So males are totally harmless of all of these. Yellow jackets, hornets, they can't hurt you. So how to tell them apart? Something that I'm constantly explaining to my neighbors in Georgia. The males have this wonderful white face, and when they're flying back and forth around the buildings, you can see that very conspicuous. The females are totally black. I think, yeah, black face, keep your space. Yellow, it's a fellow. So, but a yellow fellow. So they're harmless, and the males are doing the same thing as those giant wasp males on the tree trunk. They're looking for mating opportunities constantly. They're being a little bit territorial, chasing each other away from where females are nesting or emerging from last year's nest. Oh, there, I put a blue arrow in there to show you that. And then the other issue that I find people are confused about is the difference between the carpenter bees and bumblebees. So they're about the same size, and bumblebees are summer creatures. The differences are pretty obvious. When you look at them, look at the head. It's got a pinhead if you're a bumblebee versus a blockhead if you're a carpenter bee, because all of the muscles for working those jaws to chew into solid wood are in the head and in the cheeks, and that's why the carpenter bee is a blockhead. The other thing is that the carpenter bees have basically a bare black abdomen, and bumblebees are typically fuzzy with yellow markings on them. So now you know how to distinguish the two, and you should never worry. The bumblebees make their nests typically in a rodent burrow or a rodent nest of some sort. I had this nest, actually was in a birdhouse in my backyard this spring. When I opened the birdhouse, the bumblebees were quite active. On the right is sort of a diagram of what you've got. And up here in the corner is a pollen pot, and there's probably some honey or nectar in these others. And then you have the capped off cells from which more worker bumblebees will be emerging shortly. And the diagram shows basically the same thing. Honeybees are another animal. I've already introduced you to them a little bit there with the bee beard picture, but very important. But one thing to remember about these is that they are alien. They are not native species. They're not native pollinators. They were brought in back in the days, I think as far back as the Pilgrims, because the Indians call them white man's flies. But they've been here and they're an essential part of our agricultural economy. They're not going to go away. But most people aren't aware of the fact that they're not a native species. One of the things about bumblebees is that they have these saddlebags that they carry their pollen on. Their hind leg has broadened out. It's a wonderfully adapted animal. And they pack the pollen from flowers as they visit them into these saddlebag things, I call them, and transport it back to the nest. And of course, the pollen is what they feed their brood, along with a little bit of the honey that they also make and mix. I had the pleasure of removing this bee nest that took up residence in the neighbor's carport, up in their insulated carport, and it had only been in there about a month. When the swarm moves in, it very quickly secretes the wax to build the honeycombs, and because it's a swarm, there's already several thousand bees ready to go to work, and the queen is with them, like you saw on the bee beard. That's how they establish new colonies. So they very quickly set up housekeeping, and if they're in a good spot and you don't mind them, they're neat to have. And also this was in October 21st, National Geographic, Angela Jolie, who is trying to encourage women to get into beekeeping, which I think was wonderful to see. But that's an unusual picture to have in National Geographic, I thought. Well, as you all know, honeybees are but one of really several thousand species worldwide, which are our native pollinators. The honeybee is there, that's in the circle, but all of these, many of them are bees which occur right here on the preserve. Others are more widespread. I think in Georgia, we have close to 500 species of bees, and there are well over 200, I want to say 2,000 in North America, and probably double that elsewhere. But there's a huge variety. You can see their color patterns, their general body shape, but they all they like pollen, just like the honeybee, they like nectar, just like the honeybee, and mix it. The honeybee and the carpenter bee that we just talked about all do that sort of thing. Some of our common native bees, one that's widely sold, and maybe some of you have bought it, is the mason bee, which is very important for pollinating things like apples in the spring. It's a spring bee. The sweat bee here, you often, when you're outside and you're armed, you've got a bee there sucking up the perspiration. That's how they get their common names. They won't sting you unless you compromise them by bending your elbow. They can sting, but they're not aggressive. So all of these are solitary, just like the carpenter bee. They don't have a queen. Each female does it all. Starts the nest, divisions, it lays eggs, and so forth. One of the more interesting ones is the leaf-cutter bee. If you have certain plants that the leaf-cutter bees happen to prefer, and you see these neatly carved, simple leaf pieces removed, that's almost surely the work of the leaf-cutter bee, because they use those leaf pieces to divide the partitions in their nest, separate out the cells. So they use quite a few, actually. The other thing about leafcutter bees, you can recognize them easily from all the other solitary bees, because unlike the other bees that carry the pollen on their hind leg, like the honeybees, these guys have the pollen hairs on the underside of the abdomen. So if you see a solitary bee working with flowers, look closely and see if it has pollen on the underside of its abdomen and not on its legs. And maybe you've got leafcutter bees. They're really cool creatures. And one of the things that is out there is people putting out artificial bee homes, which are basically, that's a can of straws. So you just fill the can with straws and set it out on the corner of a fence or a tree crotch or someplace. And these guys, many of them nest in hollow twigs in nature, like sumac, for example, around here. Many of the sumac branches are likely to have mason bee nests and leafcutter bee nests. The sweat bees are all ground nesters. They make a nest that looks like this. And most of the other families of the solitary native pollinated bees nest in the ground. So they basically have a tunnel, often with a little turret over the top where they excavated the soil. And then if you follow it down, one of the summer fellows shortly after me here, Susan will probably remember, George Eichort, was world's authority on the sweat bees and studied a couple of the solitary bees in detail for his summer project here. But most all of them have nests that are not really different from what you see in this brief diagram. Okay, we're going to change gear. I have to ask you whether these are bees or wasps. Angela, she's a summer intern here who is working on bees. So this is your quiz. Can you tell me which one of those is a bee? Lower right, lower left, upper right?
Upper right.
Upper right. And why do you say that?
Because of the wing pattern and the fur.
Now, the fur is the most obvious thing.
Yeah.
All the hairs on a bee's body, including the bumblebees, are actually branched. They look like a Christmas tree. You can put one on a microscope and look at it. And so that's why they have that fuzzy appearance. Whereas wasps are pretty much devoid of any hair. So on the left are wasps, but the lower right one is a bee. But it's a parasitic bee that doesn't collect pollen, and that's why I threw it in there. In other words, it goes in the nests of one of the other solitary bees and lays its own egg on the pollen and doesn't do any of the work. It's a parasitic bee. So those are out there as well. Anyway, good job. Now, like the bees, we're getting into my love, the solitary and social wasps. And like the bees, solitary wasps are an enormous variety. This is the common one that's making the mud nests that you see on the walls of this building and the Huyck Reserve. Generally, it's a spider predator, and it makes mud nests of the tubular type. Like it's actually called the organ pipe mud dauber. And there are others that nest in the soil, like the sweat bees. And one of the best examples are bee voles. So bees are not without their own predators. This is a wasp that specializes primarily on honeybees. And then digger wasps are specialists mostly on flies. But I spent a year in Australia studying digger wasps. I think we described 60 new species of them. Nobody had ever looked at them. But in Australia, the digger wasps don't prey just on flies. They prey on dragonflies, antlions, and other weird stuff, but nothing like that happens in this country. And then the Ammophila sand wasp is a caterpillar predator. So huge variety, huge diversity of food that they select. And all of them, of course, not all, but most of them are soil nesters, except the mud dauber being a notable exception. Here's one on the left of my front yard, but you have it here. It's the largest of the solitary wasps, the cicada killer. And they are impressive because they sting cicadas and then fly them back to the hole that they made in the ground. And if you're fortunate enough to see them, they are gregarious nesters. So if you've got a little patch of them in your driveway or something, conserve them and watch them. They're fascinating, totally harmless. Say females have a sting, but solitary bees and wasps do not make any effort to defend their nest. They won't attack you, they won't chase you. You have to actually pinch one or get it caught in the crook of your eye to get stung. A thread-waisted wasp, like the Ammophila, the previous one, they're caterpillar hunters, and it's always fun to see them. They often walk back to their nest with the caterpillars settled under them. And here's a little bit of a close-up of another kind of mud dauber on the left. They're just basically the two kinds. The organ pipe one on the bottom right, here's its nest. That's what I'm seeing on the buildings here. There it is, except that that's the male. one other weird thing about garden pipe mud gardens is that the nests are tended by two wasps, a male and a female, and the male sort of stands guard while the female's out getting spiders or mud, and then he lets her in only in return for a mating. Almost every visit she comes back, he insists. Here's what it looks like when you open up a nest with this guy. This is the common black and yellow mud dauber. It's also a spider hunter, and these spiders are all stung. That's what they're using the sting for, is to paralyze their prey and transport it back. And on the left is a fairly mature larva, and then progressively smaller ones. And here she is doing her pottery work. You can tell because it's wet mud on the far left there versus the dry mud. But they're fun animals, and I've spent a lot of time doing different things with mud daubers. And John mentioned curricular materials development with science educators. That's been one of my favorite subjects for developing and working with teachers, because there's just such a rich amount of stuff. I mean, teachers can ask the kids to bring in a mud dauber lesson. Kids know where they are, they'll bring them in and they'll extra credit. And dissecting them is a neat activity that I've written up several versions of. And then in addition to all of this, that I won't have any time to talk about, is there's a really cool tiny parasitoid wasp which produces like 300 to 500 adults on one of those fat larvae. It's a tiny little wasp, but they're very teacher friendly and student friendly because they don't tend to fly. So you can work with them with a paintbrush on a sheet of paper in front of you, and kids really get turned on by that. And they're right here on the preserve. We ended up calling them wild bugs, because when I started working with teachers and they saw them for the first time, that's all I was hearing. Wow, wow. And the University of Georgia liked that so well that they trademarked. So, and you can buy wild bugs now from Carolina Biological Supply House 365 days of the year. So it's a success story, and I'm quite proud of it, actually. It's wonderful. It's been fun. So I showed you the velvet ant earlier. Their common name, especially in the South, is copkiller. And this is a reference to the fact that they have one of the most potent venoms of anything. They're not aggressive, but if you pick one up, take a look at this picture. Look at the stinger up there. Being held with a pair of tweezers, not my finger. But you get that. I've never been stung by one, so I can't personally attest to it. But their reputation is, I know, well-founded, and they're obviously brightly colored. You can't miss one when they're out walking across your lawn or driveway, and that's a warning to stay away and don't handle me. Well, the males also have that coloration. The females are flightless. They are truly like an ant. They're called velvet ants. But the males are winged, but are harmless. So I can pick up the male with no problem anytime. It's always quite easy. Now, just a few minutes here toward the end to talk about some social wasps. And Adam pointed out the social wasp nest on the entrance to the trail next to the parking lot there. And I said, okay, I'll take care of that. And I did. Here it is.
Wow.
I got this last night at dusk. It's still alive, so if you look closely, I've taken all the wasps off, so all there are the larvae. But you can see the little yellow larvae wiggling, and they're very hungry because it's been 24 hours. Let me start over here with you. And what you can see also is the paper. These are a true paper maker. It's fun to have kids try to write something on a wasp nest paper. But there's no adult wasp, so there's no hazard there, so not to worry. Of course, what that grows up to become is this kind of thing. So at this point in the year, it's about a third grown, and it's going to start to grow almost exponentially for the rest of the summer. With that being where it was, it would be a hazard to the public using the trails, and so that was why we needed to remove that one. But of course, naturally, they are a very important part of our ecosystems as predators and scavengers later in the year on all kinds of things, especially flies. They love flies. Well, the next picture, let me have a fly doesn't know me. Okay, so there's a yellow jacket, typical, and that's what basically came out of this nest. In fact, here's the rest of the story. There's the queen by herself and 5 or so of the workers. I got about 20 workers at that size in the adults, but there's a lot more to come. There would have been. So that's a great example. It's called the aerial yellow jacket, this particular one that we have commonly around the preserve here. The other one we have is the bald-faced hornet, which is what that nest over there actually is. It's very similar, makes a nest in a shrubbery or in a tree, and it's a huge paper basketball, soccer ball size by the end of the season, and pretty incredible. And this one is not the murder hornet, but of course the murder hornet out in British Columbia and Washington has gotten a lot of press over the last 2 years. And this is a member of the same genus, Vestal, that is the European hornet, which we have in the south. I don't think it's this far north, but we do. I have taken nests right there where I live in Athens. But it's pretty spectacular, and I hope that the murder hornet, I think that's a terrible name for it, but the popular press have dubbed it that, and so it's pretty well established now. But like the fire ant, I think it's here to stay. We're going to have to learn to live with it, and it'll blend in, as it were, as much as the fire ant or honeybee does as aliens. The umbrella wasps are the common ones that are up on your porches that have a nest that is open to face umbrella with the cells hanging down, but there's no outer cover to it. And these are also very common and very prone to get excited if you slam the door too hard and I have to take the nest down because my wife is ready to get stuck and she's going in and out of the door. But it's a creature worthy of a lot of respect. Makes annual nests, so this nest would have been started all by, and it's the same as the yellow jackets. The queen alone begins the nest in the spring, and then as soon as she raises the first brood, they stick around and assist and take over all the duties of expanding the nest, etc., bringing in more food for the babies and so on. A neighbor called me in early October with this problem. She thought it was a problem. It wasn't really, because what these guys do is they hibernate. These were new virgin, maybe mated queens. That's when the new queens are produced in the fall, and they were looking for a crack or crevice to get in to hibernate for the winter. On her front porch, and she had some cracks there. It was quite interesting to see at that precise moment when they were aggregating to go into hibernation. And then they moved inside. So this is the nest I just passed around. Actually, this is the same species of aerial yellow jacket, but I collected this nest off of Lincoln Pond Cottage when I was here a month ago. So this was collected on June 5th, and the one that you got now is this one that I collected last night. And so that's how much has happened in 6 weeks. And from here on, it almost grows exponentially if we let it go to become that size. So that's what you're looking at. From our Museum of Natural History in Georgia, we've got an old bald-faced hornet's nest. I like to show this because it shows the paper the fact that those different colored stripes each reflect a single mouthful of wood pulp that one wasp has collected, often from an old weathered painted structure, which gives you the different colors. And the nests are often very, very attractive. And in the boxes there behind are some of the specimens that were obtained from the nest. And you can kind of tell from the distribution map that it does occur throughout the entire eastern half of North America and well over the western upper part of the country, this species. So that's the bald-faced hornet, but most yellow jackets, the one that I started with, the picnic being interrupted, it's because of their subterranean nests. The queen has found usually a rodent squirrel or maybe a rotted out tree root or something, but gone down in there and started a little golf ball size nest, the same as you saw in the picture. And then a few weeks later, the first workers emerge, of course, and the whole cycle is going. And I think probably, I would dare say that not one of you has never been stung by a yellow jacket when you've been hiking or in the woods. And they cover all natural history types that like to walk around the book. You may have accidentally disturbed one. And if you do, you're going to be attacked because they're very, very good at tracking you down and stinging. And again, a late season nest. Here I've dug away the dirt on the left to show that it looks very much like the hornet's nest. And again, you can see the hundreds of capped brood cells when you tear away some of the nest protective outer cover. People wonder how to control them. When I first moved to Georgia, the local rednecks said, "Well, you just pour gasoline on and light it." And then I heard stories about people who done that and have to almost burn their houses down because they're often in the foundation area. The gasoline works extremely well, but you need like half a cup. You do it at night, you find the nest entrance, mark it, you go back at night and just gently pour like half a cup in the hole. And you won't have to worry about it at all. You don't have to light it. But it is not what you want to do. I never actually saw that happen, but I was told about it on several different occasions by different people who had experience. And this reminds me, I have to tell you one other story of my career, one of the highlights of working on these guys. For some reason, occasionally in the South, these nests don't die in the wintertime. Instead, the new queens come back and join mama, and they make a perennial nest, which, somebody will call me in March and say, "I've got this huge yellow jacket nest." And the first time that happened, I didn't believe it until I went and saw it. And that's indeed what happens. The nest grows to incredible proportions with multiple queens and thousands of workers. And my experience that I remember most vividly was getting a call from Savannah, Georgia, down on the coast, and I live up in Athens, and they had a perennial, huge yellow jacket nest, they said, in the vacant house. And was I interested? Well, of course I was. And I went down to see what the story was, and I couldn't find my slide of it, so I have to kind of describe it. The house was indeed abandoned, but in the middle of the living room, looking through the broken glass windows, was a big old sofa that had been abandoned there. And the wasps had made their nest in the sofa stuffing and cushions and had expanded and basically owned the entire inside of that sofa. It was amazing. And more fun yet was the fact that somehow CNN News got word of my coming down on this big nest. And they had their satellite dish truck out there with all the lights and 3 different cameras. And their cameraman got stung, I don't know how many. Why it's the light? I said, "You can't have a light on." I was wearing D-suit, glove, and veil, and the whole dark so I could go in there. Well, we did get it, and it was a nest that filled 2 of the giant chop bags, those big bags that you put your trash in. I took 2 of those and filled the entire backseat of my car to harvest that perennial nest. So they do occasionally go perennial, and one probably hopes that that's not a regular thing that's going to happen, because they're very, very, that takes a lot of food to feed that many of them, and it's a lot of wasps to have flying around one's yard. So that's about it, but I want to just end with a little bit about the sting itself and some of the aspects of that. The venom gland, labeled VG over on the far right, actually secretes the venom, and it's stored in the venom sac, VS. And then when the wasp sticks its stinger down here into something to sting it, the venom duct conducts the venom from the venom sac through the stinger, which is basically a hollow tube, into the victim. So that's the basic anatomy, and then you've got some protective sclerites that surround it at the tip of the abdomen to make it sort of bulletproof. The little DG is another gland that's very important called Dufour's gland. And I'm not going to bother you with the details of it. But one of the interesting things that most of us know about honeybees, and the way to know for sure when you got stung, whether it was a bee or a yellow jacket, if it's a honeybee, the sting will be in your skin because they have detachable, what we call autonomous stings. And they remain in the skin with that venom sac attached. And you can see the venom sac pumping the venom more into the wound as it's the way to get those is to scrape them with your fingernail or a credit card or something. Not go grab onto it and pull because you're squeezing the venom sac, and that's not a recipe for a good time. But honeybees are the only one of all of these things that I've talked about that have this phenomenon of the sting autonomy. And I've always wondered, why did they evolve it? And I suppose because the pulsating venom sac on anybody that attempts to steal their honey, any organism, is a strong reminder not to do that. I don't know. The other thing is that a lot of male wasps fool you because they go through the same motions. And if you know they're a male, and once you get to see enough of wasps and bees, it's easy for me to at least tell when I've got a male or a female in my net. But many of the males have little heavily sclerotized appendages like things like this guy on the tip of their abdomen, which they jab at you. It feels like they're being stung, but it's a pseudo sting. There's no venom gland, and but yet that little prick makes you release it in most cases pretty quickly. So I did this just to demonstrate that, yeah, they can do it, and they try, but they don't have that stuff. And this guy, Justin Schmidt, who's down in Arizona, published a very interesting book that you might find worth checking out in the library, or at least looking at. In it, he has the Schmidt sting index on a scale of 1 to 4. And honeybees go right in here with yellow jackets and hornets, 2.0. And a sweat bee is pretty mild. Let's see, I think maybe the next slide is, yeah, okay. Number 1, he describes as like a tiny spark has singed the hair on their arm. He tried to subjectively say it. He's been stung by, I would dare say, over 1,000 different kinds of bees and wasps all over the world. He's made it his passion to be stung by as many different kinds of ants, bees, and wasps as he can. The bullet ant is number 4, like walking over the flaming charcoal with a 3-inch spike in your eye. Pretty descriptive. In any case, that's out there, and it's a fun read, and kind of a lot of other anecdotes about wasps. And I've got another one for Angela. Which one of those things is not like the other? Remember the old Sesame Street? One of these things doesn't belong. There are lots of lookalikes of fools, and they, of course, use that to their advantage to avoid predators and whatnot. But actually, 3 of the 4 there are lookalikes that are the drawings, and on the right over here is a moth. I'm sorry for that. Moth that actually bores in peach trees. It's a peach tree borer as a larva, but the adults look strikingly wasp-like, but they don't threaten you or anything. On here's the yellow jacket, which is the model, and there are many species of syrphid flies or flower flies that are reasonably good pollinators in themselves, even though they don't have the collecting apparatus. They still do serve a major role. And some of the flower beetles, the longhorn beetle, and kind of a moth there as well, that all mimic, presumably gain some degree of protection. If they don't live in colonies, they'll only see one, and so forth. So how do you deal with these? Well, I'm not going to spend any more time on that, but the only one I'm going to mention is that first one. I've not tried it, and I'm kind of dying to try it. Oh, yeah. Gary Larson, of course, did not fail to notice the humor in stinging insects. But the nest decoys are basically paper bags that you suspend, and things like those gold-faced hornets are said, and there's no data that I'm aware of where it's been studied. So that's a summer research project to start here at the Huyck Preserve to see if we hang bags on our various porches, whether we get any yellow jacket nests. They would have to be, started before the June 1st when those cranks up. But it's a testable hypothesis. And with that, pesticides, of course, I'm preaching to the choir on that. Certainly, they kill everything, so that's used only then as a last resort, even though the companies would love to have you buy and apply ad nauseum because they kill them. And then I showed you the little straw houses that you can make by just putting straws in a can or container, but there are commercially now various flower stores and garden shops and other places that sell bee houses. They always advertise them as bee houses, but solitary wasps nest in them equally well. In fact, sometimes in my experience, I get more solitary wasps. It's the ones that nest in hollow twigs. And there are a whole suite of solitary wasps that nest in twigs, as well as the bees that it's talking about. So now I'm going to stop and say, any questions? You may recognize what's going on there. Learn about predation on the yellow jacket. And the guy is well armed, so he's not likely to feel anything. Yes.
In the previous slide, I just wanted to ask them wasps, like bees, that they take in the mimicry or
What?
they take in mimicry or the way.
Oh, good question. She's asking about the kind of mimicry where you have the ones that resemble the lookalikes. And we have in animal behavior 2 types of mimicry: the Batesian, named after Henry Bates, and Mullerian, named after Muller. But in the one case, the Batesian mimicry, the model is noxious. The mimic is completely innocuous. Couldn't hurt you to try. So that's what all of those were that I was showing you. Like the flies, the moths, the beetles, they have no weapons and they can't hurt you. So that's all basic mimicry. Mullerian mimicry is the other common kind, which is most common in groups of tropical butterflies, where everybody is poisonous. And they all have a common pattern that's fairly similar to a predator trying to catch one. There may be 8 or 10 species of them, living in the habitat that share a similar color pattern, and they all are noxious. So a predator needs to only experience this in one of them to learn. Here, they have to experience the real thing to learn. Eat a fly first, that's virtue, you don't learn it. So you've got to get with it. But that's a great question. Yes, sir.
No. I'm curious about what the hornet are using to determine the predator or the disruptor that has gotten a hold of their nest or disturbed their nest. Is it heat? Is it movement? Is it smell? What are they doing to locate the prowler?
It's almost exclusively the movement.
Movement.
Yeah. It senses the vibration.
Yeah.
And that's normally is pretty stable, stationary. Some of them have an alarm pheromone, we call it, a chemical, but after disturbance is released by the wasp closest to where the disturbance occurred, and that excites surrounding organs as the odor vapor spreads. And so it does enhance the defensive response. So it's a double-edged thing there. They initially respond due to some sort of mechanical disturbance, but then in the process they add chemical signal that makes their nest mates excited. By the way, all the workers of social bees and wasps that are in colonies are genetically female, so they do possess this thing. All the ones that do the workers. Males are only produced typically at the end of the colony cycle, and they have nothing to do with working on the nest. It's strictly a lot of fine mates.
I'm curious about this for a number of years. When I was mowing the field, getting close to the edge where trees hung over the my tractor develops vertical hit one is nest, and you know what happened. I had some kind of that, but what they were after, it seemed more than me, was the muffler that was up there, you know, and red hot.
Yeah.
They hit that and almost instantly falls to the ground. So I didn't know whether it was heat.
Sensing the radiation from the heat. and going to that. We're warm blooded, but not as warm as the radiation. The observation. Yes.
Where honeybees are native, Europe and such, right?
Yes.
Are there
Southeast
others?
Asia.
Yeah, okay, Southeast Asia. Are there other species that have the same sting and die?
Yeah, I think all the species of honeybees, there are 4.
Okay, but a non-honeybee, is it, because you said it was a unique,
Oh, the autonomy of the sting is
Yeah.
characteristic of all the genus Apis, which there are
Okay.
at least 4 or 5 species, but they're mostly Southeast Asian.
but no other genera do that?
There are a couple of others that have been found that are not ones that are commonly recognized, not of interest to an entomologist.
So is it an old world thing, not a new world thing?
Well, honeybees are native to the old world.
Right, that's what I'm wondering, you said that, you know, that, we don't have any that do that here, I mean, but they're native here.
Honestly, well, we don't have honeybees.
Right,
I
right.
don't know the ones that, I can't pick one offhand.
Okay,
They're just so uncommon, but I've heard of a few that are do have, but not ones that we typically have to do. That's a great question. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could tell us just for a minute about your research here now.
Yeah, I passed around at the beginning the box of wasps. When I was a graduate student and was here in 1967, the project that I was working in insect systematics, that is describing and identifying new species and looking for wasps. And there's a kind of a insect trap called the Malaise trap that was developed in Europe. And what it is it's a non-attractive trap. There's no attractant in it. It's a flight intercept. So insects just flying through the vegetation hit the center panel, which is black typically. And the typical response of an insect that flies into something is to fly toward the light, which is up. So this Malaise trap looks like a tent. And it's sloped upward, and at the top corner is a bottle with poison in it, and the insects hit the central barrier, look up, it's right above, so they tend to go up, and they end up in the bottle. And that was the project because I was interested in getting some wasps for my systematics research. I didn't have a long-term objective, but I had a couple of the Malaise traps, so I set them up in 67 and sampled all some and got lots of great stuff. Most of it is now in either the Smithsonian or the Georgia or the Harvard collections. And what motivated me to talk to Ann in the Huyck Reserve for this summer was actually 2 years ago, was when it was awarded, because the project was supposed to be 2020. Some of you may have heard of the so-called insect apocalypse. Even if that name doesn't mean anything, what you will probably agree with me is if you're driving down the road these days and you look for the bug splats on your windshield, they're almost non-existent. And this phenomenon has been noted all over the world. Insects seem to be really declining as populations. I can remember trips where I had a whole grill of my car covered and really struggled to get the darn dead bugs off. The other thing is, if you have a porch light at night, you see very few large moths, very few beetles. There's still a few, obviously, but they're not like they used to be for those of us who've been around. And I think any of us that are in our middle age or later certainly have seen that phenomenon. So it's been widely noted. And so it occurred to me that this was an opportunity to perhaps get some hard data, because that's what science is all about. And that box that I sent around with the sawflies, the sawflies are a primitive type of wasp that don't sting, but they are, their larvae develop as caterpillars on plants, so they're much like a moth or butterfly in that respect. And we got like 115 species from the Huyck Preserve in the Blaze traps 55 years ago. So what I set out to do then is I've set these same identical kind of malaise traps. And if you walk around the pond loop, there are two on the east side of Lincoln Pond, and there's one on the hillside as you go come out of the trail past the Far Pond camp there. They're basically white with a black center panel, and if you look closely, they slope up and there's a bottle on them. And so I've set these in almost the identical place that they were set 50 years ago. Not perfectly so, but, and of course there's been habitat change and succession. Like the trap on the east side back then was in a nice grove of ash trees. The emerald ash borer has taken all those out, not an ash tree there now. But the one across the street here, what used to be called Trout Pond, I guess Huyck had a little dam, the stream dam up the pond back up, and the dam was broken then, and it still is. That little area around the pond looks very much the same as it did 50 years ago. Anyway, so I'm now specifically looking at the sawflies, and I'll be comparing the diversity from 50 years ago to the diversity now to see if we can add that as a contribution to is there indeed an insect apocalypse approach. And I don't know the answer, but that, I hope that's brief enough. So if you see these bug traps, they're harmless. They catch a lot of bugs. Leanne is here all summer and has been thankfully emptying those traps every day. So it's been great. Other questions? We've used up the full hour, so I appreciate very much your attention, and I hope that some of the things I presented are of interest and maybe learn something.